No question about it. Penn State looked great. They played great against Minnesota. But Ohio State, just a little bit of a different animal. Great time to subscribe to the channel. Big Ten content every single day. Always crush that like button. Yeah, the Buckeyes are a little bit different than a Minnesota team with a backup quarterback. I'd say that. Here's the matchup I'm going to start with, and here's the matchup I'm salivating over going into this matchup. Those Ohio State wide receivers, even though Jackson Smith and Jigba probably won't be able to go, you still got a really good core of wideouts, and they continue to prove that week after week after week. And then you look at the other side. You look at Penn State and the talent they have in that secondary. Joey Porter Jr., the lockdown guy. You look at Jair Brown, the ball hawk, 3 interceptions this season. You look at Kalen King, top 5 in the Big Ten right now in pass breakups. This is a secondary that's really good. And I think what Manny Diaz has to do, you got to look at what Phil Parker did early in that first half against Ohio State. This was an Iowa defense that manned up and was physical at the point of attack with these Ohio State wide receivers. And they did a great job at limiting the big play, because that's what you have to do when you play Ohio State. So many years in the past, you look at those big 50, 60-yard touchdowns over the top, and that's been such a big part to Ohio State football and why they've been so explosive and why they've been so good in the Big Ten Conference year after year, is because they've got really good talent at wide receiver, they've got really good talent at quarterback, and they take advantage of that in terms of secondaries in the Big Ten Conference. Can they do it? Can they take advantage of Penn State secondary? I believe the matchup here is, are there too many Ohio State wide receivers for Penn State to contain? I think that's the big question. Of course, you got Joey Porter Jr. on one side. Kalen King is pretty solid on the other, but we mentioned it before. Julian Fleming, Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Ibuka, you look at Cade Stover at tight end, and that's just the start of it. Is there enough depth in that Penn State secondary to contain all of these guys on Ohio State? That is the big question I have. Because if Penn State can lock in, if they contain what Ohio State does in that passing game, it then relies on that Ohio State run game. So let's talk about the Buckeye run game here for just a minute. Ohio State has a very good offensive line. I'll get to their pass protection because they're very good in pass protection here this season. This is a very good offensive line. You look at last week, right? We're talking about following the blueprint of what Phil Parker laid down at Iowa last week. This was an Iowa defense that played good up front, and they played good against the running game. So, Ohio State, I think they need to have a good day. I think they need to focus on running the football because of what Penn State has back in that secondary. I don't know if Ohio State is going to be able to hit a ton of those big plays down the field because of how Penn State can match up against these Ohio State wide receivers. Now, I will say this, I do think those Ohio State wide receivers, they'll get theirs. They've proven in a lot of these games where maybe they might not start great, like against Iowa. Eventually, they got to make adjustments, and eventually they'll hit the big play. But who knows? I'm not sure if they'll get that early in this game. I want to see the running game have their best game of the season. And I think they're poised for it, because I'm not sure if Penn State has the rush defense to contain what Ohio State has. You saw what happened against Michigan, allowing 400 yards. Now, they got worn down in that game. They played a whole lot of plays in that first half. And then, of course, you saw what happened in that second half. They kind of got worn down, and Michigan ran all over them. Look, you talk about that Minnesota game. Minnesota, you go in there with a backup quarterback, and broadcasters were saying out of the game, they're selling out in the run game, yet Muhammad Ibrahim still found a way to get over 100 yards yet again. I believe this Penn State defense is susceptible to being ran against. I believe this Ohio State offensive line, and then you look at Travion Henderson, you look at Mayan Williams, everybody, Ohio State had a lot of injury troubles early in the season, but everybody's getting healthier. Everybody's getting back in the lineup. Henderson and Mayan Williams attack this Penn State rush defense. That's going to open up a whole lot more passing lanes down the field when more Penn State defenders creep in to try to stop the running game. That's what I would do if I'm the Buckeyes in this football game. Let's talk about that pass protection. Ohio State has allowed the least amount of sacks in the Big Ten Conference this year. 5 sacks only this season. So I have a hard time looking at Penn State and saying, yeah, they're going to disrupt C.J. Stroud, because I don't think they are. Look, games are won and lost, in my opinion, not only in the Big Ten Conference, but across all of college football and in football in general. Games are won and lost in the trenches. And I believe on both sides of the football, Ohio State has the advantage. You look at Ohio State's defensive line, one of the very best defensive lines in the entire country, led by Mike Hall Jr., top 5 in the Big Ten in sacks, top 5 in the Big Ten in tackles for loss. And this Penn State offensive line, surprisingly though, they're 4th in the Big Ten in what I call pass protection. They've only allowed 9 sacks this season. So maybe they're a little bit underrated by yours truly and maybe others, but I still think this is a better Ohio State defensive line, a lot of depth, than Penn State's offensive line. And I look at the other side, Ohio State, I mentioned, has given up the least amount of sacks. You look at Penn State's front, they've been run against. They're not great at getting after the passer. I really believe Ohio State has the advantage on both sides of the football in terms of the trenches. I want to bring up a point because I want to bring something up here quick. Okay, red zone defense. Look at last week where Iowa forced a bunch of field goals. But they didn't have the offense to take advantage. Okay, let's rewind to Penn State's game against Michigan. Held them, you guessed it, to a bunch of field goals. If Penn State can capitalize on that red zone defense, especially early in this game, holding Ohio State to field goals as opposed to touchdowns, I think that's where Penn State could have advantage. But they need to take advantage on their offense. They need to run the football. We've said it so many times. Penn State is better. Penn State is good, maybe even great, when they have a running game with Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. I said it before, winning the game in the trenches. Ohio State's got a really good defensive line. I'm not sure if this O-line can hold up against what the Buckeyes want to do, but Penn State needs to be able to run the football to provide balance. Sean Clifford has proven many times he's not exactly a guy that can go out there and win it himself and throw for 300 or 400 yards in this game. I mentioned Jair Brown with 3 interceptions this season. You look at Ohio State safety, transfer safety Tanner McAllister, also with 3 interceptions. Key for both teams, keep the ball away from the ball hawks. That's especially Penn State, man. You got to play turnover-free football. You turn the football over to Ohio State, you give them a short field, you might be just giving them the football game at that point. It's going to be a fun one. We know this is always a great matchup. I want to hear what you guys think of this one. Buckeyes and Nittany Lions. Leave your thoughts and predictions in the comments below. Make sure you subscribe to Big Ten Ted. I'm Big Ten Ted, and we'll see you in the next one.